So, Teach a Child to Read with Children's Books is a unique approach to teaching reading for you to teach your child how to read at home. It's a common sense, doable approach. We have had many testimonials over the years of how parents and other caregivers have learned to teach their children to read using this approach, and how often they purchased other packaged reading curriculums or phonics programs only to find out that those didn't meet the need. But when they approached things the way we explain it in the book, their children were having success. What's nice about our approach is that you can individualize it to all of your children. So if one child is a strong reader and another one is starting out not so strong, you can adapt what you do with them. Our approach combines story reading, phonics, and writing to promote reading success. But what really sets us apart is that we encourage you to use real children's books and authentic children's literature to help your child to learn to read and to promote a love for books. We don't sell any packaged phonics programs or contrived phonics readers. We show you how to approach this process using the books that you and your children are going to enjoy and love together. If you want to read more reader testimonials, please go to our website and there's a page dedicated to that. And if you're interested in getting more involved and you need some help, join our Facebook group. It's free and you can get all your questions answered there, along with some free resources and lots of helpful videos and Facebook Live tips. So here are the ways that you can connect with us. As I mentioned, our free Facebook group. We also have a Facebook page where we post things. We are brand new on Instagram, so please join us. We need some followers. Our blog is up and running, so check out new blog posts every week. Of course, if you haven't already, you can always purchase the book, but if you are not there yet and you're curious as to what the book is about, please sign up for our newsletter and you'll get a free chapter. And the Chapter 5 download will explain to you what sets us apart from other reading programs, and then you can decide if this approach is what's best for you and your children. So let's talk about what really matters for readers. I spent a great deal of my career over the past 28 years or so teaching reading, and I've taught all age ranges from preschool to middle school, and I spent a great deal of my time working with children who were struggling readers or who fell behind for some reason. My master's degree is in elementary reading and literacy, and that really served me well when trying to figure out the needs of my struggling readers that I was working with. So there are some things that all readers need, and struggling readers are no exception. It's just that what we're going to do for the struggling readers, we're going to do more of, we're going to do more intensely, we're going to do more often. But the basic things are always the same. So a lot of times I would hear from parents who would say, but my child's different, but there must be some program out there that will fix my child. And I had to keep continuing to come back to them and say, this is what all readers need. And this is from What Really Matters for Struggling Readers by Richard Allington, who is one of the great leaders in literacy of all time. So these things apply to all children. So don't think of this as just struggling readers, and don't think of this as those who are on track. This is what all children need. It's very obvious, and the research shows us that they need to be read to a lot. So you're always going to hear me talk about the read aloud. There's a great deal of information in our book about the read aloud. You know that there are great proponents out there of the read aloud. It's for a reason. It sounds so simple, but sometimes parents can't wrap their head around how this could be the key. But I'm telling you, it is the number one thing that you can do for your children is to read to them a lot, whether they're readers or non-readers, and no matter how old they get, continue to read to them. When children learn to read and are beginning those stages, well, guess what? They need to read a lot because they need to practice. We'll talk about that in a second. They need lots of books to choose from. So they need a literacy rich, print rich environment in the home. So get those baskets out and fill them with books. Go to the thrift stores, go to the co-ops, go to the library book sales. Um, Get involved in book exchanges with your friends and family and get books that your children can choose from. We want to make that a rich environment for them. when they start to read and they start to practice, they need books they could read successfully. And what I mean by successfully, I mean is easy. They need a lot of easy practice. So we'll talk about that in a second as well. They need uninterrupted time to read. Think about when you're reading a book and 10 or 15 minutes go by and you're just getting into the story and then the phone rings or the timer goes off in the kitchen or someone's asking you, they need something. Our children need that time to get lost in a book, to get into the flow of reading, and to build that flow and fluency. They need to be able to read fluently. So we'll talk about that. Fluency is really important to comprehension, which is really what reading is all about. And they need to be able to think about what they're reading. So we need to teach them how to do that and be intentional. And that helps when you do the read aloud. That's when you do also the think alouds together and you talk what's going on in the story and why is this character acting this way. What you're doing is modeling what they're going to do independently. So again, cannot emphasize the read aloud enough. The resources that I always go back to, and I know that there are others out there, but Jim Treeley's was the king of the read aloud, the read aloud handbook. What I really like about this is he was not a teacher, he was a parent just like you, and he found the magic of the read aloud, and so he made it really his life's work to support parents in doing this at home, even if their children were attending a school. Mem Fox has a short little book called Reading Magic, and when you read that, you will be convinced that the read aloud is reading magic. This quote is from 1990, but it still holds true. Everyone still agrees that the most important activity for building the knowledge and skills eventually required for reading is that of reading aloud to children. In this, both the sheer amount of and the choice of reading materials seems to make a difference. So we're talking about choice of reading materials. So we're exposing our children to a lot of things, and we're talking about volume. So lots and lots of volume. You can see these pictures of the families involved, dads, moms, parents doing this, pointing, getting the children excited about books. This is how we lay a foundation for a literacy-rich home, and this is how we lay a foundation for reading success for all children. So parents often ask me, how much should my child read each day? And I want to just preface this by saying, when I say reading, I mean reading. I mean a book is open and your child is either reading aloud to you or someone else, or your child is reading silently to themselves. This does not include worksheets, flashcards, skill practice, blackboard, whiteboard, magnetic letter practice, none of that. This is actual reading time. So for our beginning readers, we really recommend 90 minutes or more each day. And again, I always just go back to, well, do you want your child to be good at reading? Now, we don't want this to be um, 90 minutes in one block. We want this to be 90 minutes throughout the day, so you can spread that out. Okay, so the other answers: B, 20 minutes 2 times each day. That's not going to be enough. C, just as much as she needs to get his or her schoolwork complete. That's what a lot of parents, if you send your child to school, you think, because you think they're getting a lot of reading time at school, and unfortunately, studies show that that's not happening. They're getting a lot of time doing worksheets and practice and things, but not so much reading practice. And then only as much as he or she wants to. We all know there are children who will want to read more than 90 minutes a day, but we all know we might have some children who do not want to read that much, and we're going to have to work with that because we do want them to get that practice. So 90 minutes or more each day, and if your child is a struggling reader, it's probably more like double that. Okay, so here's some information that kind of shows you this just based on what's happening. The idea is what we do more of, we get better. So you'll see that at the bottom, if a child read about 1.6 minutes of reading per day, and that's aside from, these were students who went to a school. So aside from that at home, they read 1.6 minutes a day. They learned that was 51,000 words per year. They usually achieved in the 10th percentile. And then you can see how that goes up. So a child who reads 12.9 minutes a day ends up somewhere near the 50th percentile. 40 minutes a day, 90th percentile. So now we're seeing the sheer volume of reading really makes a difference, okay? And then these are kids who not necessarily are struggling, but just have learned to read and then are reading in addition to what they need to do in their classroom setting. So the NAEP continues to tell us that at every level, reading more pages in school and at home each day was associated with higher reading scores. So no matter what those scores were, state tests, diagnostic tests, achievement tests, tests that you might be doing at home, reading more is important. So volume really does matter. Donalyn Miller wrote a fabulous book called The Book Whisperer. I believe she has a podcast now. I believe she's with Scholastic. Her book is absolutely fabulous. She worked with sixth graders who every single one of them passed their state test in Texas. And I live in Texas, so I can tell you the standards are high. But she set a goal for every child to read at least 40 books per school year. Trust me, this wasn't easy when some kids were coming in and hadn't read one or two full books in the previous school years. Not all children met that 40, but they certainly got past one or two. In doing that, she managed to promise to students and their parents every single year that they would pass their state tests, and they did. This is phenomenal. It's so simple that we can't think it's absolutely true, but it just goes to show you the power of the volume of reading that your children will do, because we know that what we do, we get better at. So that's called the Matthew effect. And if you've read anything by Malcolm Gladwell, he also calls this the 10,000 hour principle. Children who read more read better. Those who read better read more. That makes sense, the Matthew effect. If you do something more, you get better at it. The better you get at it, the more likely you are to do it. That's why our struggling readers, they don't want to read because they don't feel good about reading, so they don't like to do it. The less they do it, the farther behind they fall from their peers. So it's that vicious cycle, and we need to reverse the cycle. If your child has been swinging to the pendulum of not wanting to read because it's hard, we need to swing the pendulum back, and we need to just be intentional about it. It's not going to happen overnight, but it certainly will and can happen, I promise you. My challenge is a lot of times parents will say, wow, Mary, 90 minutes or 3 hours, that is crazy. That's incredible. We don't have that kind of time in a day. So my challenge would always be, well, tally your child's time spent reading versus all of their activities. That doesn't mean I don't want them to go outside and play or be involved in sports and things like that. But we need to stop and think, if you're running a race and someone is, let's say, 100 yards ahead of you, and you both continue that race at the same pace, you're going to remain 100 yards behind that person in the lead. So if your child is behind and you want them to catch up, we do need to do more to catch up, right? That's just common sense, right? At the same time, when our children are learning to read, that's what we want them to get good at. So we do need to set that time aside and be intentional about it. I know just with my own children in the home, if I would have tallied up the video game time and the other things like that, that they were on the computer, especially when they got a little older, like fifth grade and up, it was definitely more than time they were spent reading. But prior to that, I could really control that. And so I built and ingrained in them that reading was important. And now that they're adults, they're definitely avid readers and they know how to balance their own time. So again, be intentional and just set a goal. What is it I really want my children to get good at? So here's another quiz for you. Who scores better on high stakes testing? I throw this in here only because it's such an incredible story. So you probably are going to guess it's not A, because I already talked about students who complete a lot of test prep activities and worksheets. We know worksheets just make us good at worksheets. They don't really make us good at reading, and they don't make us good at testing, unfortunately, and that's what's happening a lot in the public school system. It's not just children who have higher IQs. How about students who read from a variety of genres and read often? You may have watched the movie The Glass Castle, but there's something in there they didn't really emphasize the way she emphasized it in the book. So I'll get back to that in a second. Or D, students who began reading at an early age? Not necessarily. So let me tell you a little bit about the Glass Castle and that story there. So when Jeanette was with her family, they were often, kind of traveling, and they were here and there and everywhere, and they would end up at a school in the middle of the school year or after everyone else had started, and they came in kind of ragtag, because of the story where they were sort of just travelers, I guess is the way you would say it. And inevitably, she said that the teachers would assume that her and her siblings were not smart because of the way they came dressed and the way they came late to school and the way they didn't start at the beginning of the year. She would assume that the teachers would assume that they couldn't read. But unfortunately, as soon as the teachers found out, they were all really very good readers and they did well in school across the board. Not because they spent every school day in school, because they didn't. Their parents didn't send them to school often, but because no matter where they ended up, their parents, the first thing they did was go to the public library and get them library cards. And their mother was an avid reader, and so she would have set aside whole days where the children were just reading. They didn't go to school, but they were reading. So not that I'm advocating for that lifestyle, but it's an interesting story because it really spoke to me as a reading teacher, was that it wasn't about the time spent in the classroom. It wasn't about their IQs. It wasn't about all the activities and worksheets. It was about the sheer volume of reading and the modeling that was set in the home by the parents, that reading is what we do and reading is how we learn about the world. So if you haven't read the book, The Glass Castle, it is a great read and it's way, way better than the movie, in my humble opinion. So we talk about reading more. We talk about that because children learn overall world knowledge. So again, you can go places in books that you can't necessarily go physically. We can learn about all kinds of things. We can learn about anything from books. And that gives children background knowledge to attach to new things that they're learning in science or history or art or any subject if they have been read to a lot and they read a lot. It definitely increases their vocabulary. There are amazing, amazing studies on this, which I'm not going to go into today, about students who have been read to and have lots of books in the home. The amount of vocabulary words that they come to school ready to read with is so significantly great. It's millions. And so you're giving your child a huge leg up by starting to read to them when they're very young. It helps develop sustained attention. We know that in today's world, this is a struggle because of the fast-paced internet world and video game pace and TV, where things are coming at us very quick and we're moving quickly from image to image. This is not what reading is about. So we need to help sustain that attention span. Reading will do that for your child. It trains children to think critically, to predict, to infer, to compare and contrast. These are all things you're going to do with your child casually, having good conversations when you talk about that. I talk about that in our other video, what motivates children to read. Believe it or not, reading more develops you into a better writer. So I am also a writer, and one of the things that I've learned from all the things that I've listened to authors about is they say if you want to be a better writer, you need to read a lot. You need to read a lot. So reading helps us write. They just go hand in hand. How can I get my child to read more? Well, invest in books. So if you're going to invest in anything, invest in books. Go to the library every week. Make it a regular visit. Continue to read together. Continue to read aloud every single day. If you have something that comes up during the day, and your reading time in and doing the other skills and activities gets pushed aside, let that get pushed aside. Choose the read aloud. Choose the read aloud every day. Let them choose books. Choice is a powerful motivator. Don't criticize their choices. It may not be what you want to read, and it may not be what you thought they would be interested in, but let them browse in the library and figure out what their interests are. And again, we talked about this. You're going to have to be intentional and limit other activities in order to build that time in for reading. Keep books everywhere. Keep them in your bags, in the car, in the bathroom. Give them reading lights. I know that we want our kids to get to bed, but if they are so excited about a book that they want to get under the covers with a flashlight and read, well, who am I to say no to that? I used to keep a box of books on the kitchen table, in the living room, just anywhere that would give them an opportunity to read. Excuse me. Give books as gifts. Turn on the closed caption on the TV. This is a funny thing, but when you do this, it's amazing how your kids can't help but pay attention and read it. And it's okay if they're interested in magazines or joke books or stat books or graphic novels. A couple of things to remember. I'm really a big proponent of this because I have two boys, is that boys' tastes may differ from girls, and so choice is research proven to matter, as I mentioned. So be very careful that you're not trying to shape. I mean, we want to guide and we want to expose them, but what your son may choose to read may not be exactly what you consider classic material, but it motivates them. So we want to kind of roll with that when we can. And your child's reading behaviors are going to reflect those of their parents and teachers. And if you are your parent's teacher, then you have that great responsibility. So please be a great model, and share yourself as a reader. Help them to know that how much you value reading. Okay, does it really count if it's a graphic novel or a stats book or picture books? What if my third grader wants to read picture books? Yeah, it does count. It's okay. Now, of course, we want to make sure we're reading with them at the level of instruction, which we'll talk about in a second. But when they're doing easy reading, please let them choose things that are easy and enjoyable for them. So let's talk about that. What is appropriate for my child to read? Independent reading practice should be nearly 100% accuracy. It's okay if they stumble over a word or two, as long as the interest is high. I have seen children really push through a difficult book because they wanted to read it and they chose it, but I do not recommend that you ask them to read things independently at a level anywhere below 97% accuracy, especially if they're just gaining confidence. They really need to find that confidence that I can do this. This is easy and fun and enjoyable. Now, when working with what I would call a learning coach or a teacher or you as a parent for instruction, it really needs to be 95 to 97% accuracy. I would not, even then, during that instructional time when you're sitting down with your child, I would not go under 95% because, again, you're just creating frustration, and reading growth will not happen at a frustration level. So anything below that we consider frustration level. Again, let's just review. These are the things that readers need. Please keep these at the forefront. I know that it's easy to get distracted about activities and skills and drill, but this is the meat and potatoes of your reading program. We know that children need to read fluently, and so if we don't have children reading fluently, it is going to impact their reading comprehension. So here are the skills that students need to read fluently. Sight word mastery. If your child doesn't know the sight words, and you can learn more about that in our other video about reading fluently. I go into detail on that. If your child doesn't know sight words, get out the flashcards and practice and start incorporating discussions about sight words during your reading time. Decoding skills and strategies, they absolutely do need those. They need to understand punctuation and its purpose. They need a wide vocabulary, which it comes from you reading out loud to them. They need to understand how good reading sounds. Again, that comes from you modeling so that they can replicate that. They need to know that text is organized into meaningful phrases. If they're sounding out every word and they're reading part by part, that's not a fluent reader. So we want to move them into a more whole to part reader. They need to know how to use expression and intonation. You teach them that when you read aloud and when you practice with them. And of course, they need to read at an appropriate rate, which is not too fast or too slow. If any of these skills are missing, fluency will be compromised, which in turn does impede or impact comprehension. So if your child is not reading smoothly and fluently using all of these skills, then you want to try to determine what's missing there, and you want to back up your reading selection to make it a little bit easier so you could pick up on that fluency. Don't continue trudging through and hope that it'll just work. What you're creating is frustration and a lot of confusion. A lot of times parents think their child has a reading disability. I worked for several years on a team that helped parents talk about or not diagnose, but determine if their child needed diagnosing for reading disabilities. So when should you be concerned? If your child expresses extreme stress or anxiety about reading, when they just have a complete meltdown, it's stupid, they say they hate reading, if they complain about headaches or they're rubbing their eyes or their eyes are watering when they try to read, there could be some things going on there. So make note of those things. Again, this is after you have backed up and you've selected some easy reading for them. But if your child is unable to master basic skills, even though he's age appropriate and has had all the exposure and experience that we talked about, and he's still struggling, you might have a concern. So start to take some notes of what those things are so you can look for patterns. What's missing? When does he seem confused? What kind of mistakes is he making? Another thing to look out for is if your child seems to know letters or words one day and does really well, but then the next day is just not able to read the same things, or shows little attempting at decoding, is just guessing. If your child skips lines often, loses his place, rereads, flips lines, substitutes words that would make sense but are not close in appearance or spelling, like caterpillar for insect or mountains for hills. So they're kind of guessing at the words and they're really not paying attention to what the letters say. Those clues could definitely be a sign that you need to look into some expert advice. But those are some common things to look for. If your child is just missing some words here and there, that's not a reading disability. That just means they need more practice. So I hope that helps you to understand what it is that children need and what it is that you're going to make as the basis and the foundation of your reading program. Again, don't forget to connect with us in all these places, and hope to see you in the Facebook group, because that's where we really can dig into support and help and getting some specific resources into your hands. If you are ready to make the plunge, I encourage you to go ahead and purchase the book and then join the Facebook group so we could go ahead and get started helping you. Thanks, everybody.